So I'm Debbie Bacharach. I'm class of 1988 and parent of 24. My daughter Rose is there. I am a member of the Alumni Council, and I am very honored to host this talk tonight between poets Octavio González and Julia Bouwsma in a conversation about the extended elegy. So you might have noticed we're taping this session, and it's going to be available at the SwatTalk's recording website on the webpage in about 2 to 3 weeks. It is sponsored by Alumni Council. The way this is going to work is I'm going to introduce them, and then Julia and Tavi are going to read for about 7 minutes each. I have some questions prepared, and then we're going to throw it open to you. So you can't see each other's questions, but I'll be monitoring the chat, and I will ask, is there anything else background you need to know? I think that's it. So let me introduce Octavio González, class of 1997. He teaches at Wellesley College, where he's an associate professor of English and creative writing. He's on sabbatical this academic year and is a distinguished visiting scholar at the University of Buffalo. He's also a Lambda Literary Emerging Writers Fellow, summer 2021. His latest book is Misfit Modernism, a monograph on the modern novel and intersectional alienation, which just came out in paperback from Pennsylvania State University Press. As a poet scholar, Tavi divides his time between poetry and criticism. He's currently at work on a long-form elegy, Conversations with My Fathers, part of which he'll read for us tonight. It's long. I've read it, I love it, but it's like 31 pages, so he's going to read a portion of it. And his second poetry collection is titled Limerence, a form of romantic love that borders on obsession. His first volume, The Book of Hours, was selected for the series at Letras Latinas, available online, and we'll put that link in the chat for you. And some of his work appears in the Latino Book Review, the Lambda Literary Journals, and he will be in the chat if you want to contact him. And I also want to introduce Julia Bouwsma, class of 2002. She was recently appointed the 6th Poet Laureate of Maine, and off-the-grid homesteader, poet, librarian, and editor. Bouwsma is the author of 2 poetry collections, Midden and Work by Bloodlight. And I will put links for both of those in the chat, because as a working poet, I want to encourage you to buy their work. Honors she has received include the 2019 and 2018 Maine Literary Awards for Poetry Book, to 2016 through 17 Poets Out Loud Prize, and the 2015 Cider Press Review Book Award. She's the library director for the Webster Library in Kingfield, Maine, and teaches in the creative writing department at the University of Maine at Farmington. Oh, amazing. Okay, so Tavi, maybe you can go first, and I will just make myself disappear, and we'll hear some poetry for 7 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Debbie. I'm really excited to be here. The first thing I just want to thank you all for joining us. And I also want to give my thanks to Dina for the invitation to participate in my very first SWAT talk. I also want to offer my gratitude to Debbie for your enthusiastic embrace of my work and for putting all this together, putting Julia and I together on this panel. I also want to thank Lisa for all of your help with the details of Zoomification, which hopefully will go very smoothly, as Zoom always seems to do. And also, last but not least, I want to thank Julia for sharing your electric work in progress, a royal crown of sonnets titled "I'm Okay, but the country is not." I found it to be an incredible reading experience. I look forward to discussing it with you and Debbie. Okay, so I'm going to read, as Debbie mentioned, an excerpt from my long poem, an elegy called Conversations with My Fathers. He bought the blood to save my mother's life when they cut her ventrum in half to splice me out of her womb, a 9-pound infant who peed in my mother's mouth when she awoke and held me. His hair is all white now, soft as a unicorn's, or a real steed, not yet ready to become mythical. The Honeymooners, Bugs Bunny, even Alice's Restaurant, I watched them all, black and white and Technicolor, in a powder blue bedroom without windows, the TV screen my only window into worlds made of English, unaccented, generic, perfect. Or quite the contrary. To the moon, Alice, Ralph Cramden bellowed, his signature line with the uppercut gesture, menace hidden in canned laughter. I don't want to write this. So I take off my glasses and squint in blurry vision, the sound of this, that, or the other. What? The TV was on, my American babysitter. But I must stop crying now, put back my $300 frames, progressive lenses for my middle-aged vision. A scar down her belly, ugly as cicatrix, the Latin more realistic, the Spanish too real, that marred my mother's forehead, though bangs would have hidden it. A perfect C, a third eye, the last clairvoyant, I once called her. Even in this poem, her story takes some precedence, for she it was who told me all these fathers were better than only. I count 3, no, 3.5, 3 3/4. How many men have I slept with? Do I count each one as a father? That, my friend, sister, brother, lover, is a step too far, a step beyond the precipice of this story. I don't stand like Richard III, lame-legged, after killing his brother's children, to ascend to the throne of Lancaster. Or was it York? Rose red or rose white? And declaim, now is the winter of our discontent. Richard and his 3 eyes, his 3 victims, my 3 fathers, all but one dead, but I didn't kill them. I bet he still carries his heavy backpack on one shoulder, the opposite that I carry mine on, or maybe the same. Which would you rather? My hair is only salt and pepper, more black than gray, curlier, afro-ish, and as proud am I of it as I am sad for its demise. That too is winter. Now I'm going to skip ahead. There is no love unless it's tribal, goes the current cultural logic of identity. No love for thee nor for me unless it's from we, from other me's, goes the current dispensation of belonging. And I rage, rage, rage against the dawning of the light that says, yes, okay, yes, I will, yes, I will forsaking my forsaken identity. I'll grow up finally and accept that only those whose beautiful good looks resemble mine can love me like I want, need, deserve, expect, suffer to be loved, because as I leave the classroom, I've spent an hour looking at my students' faces, and I see in some whose amber colors resemble my own, I see in their glassed-in eyes the shadow of disappointment, that I am not enough like them. I do not personify their ideal of who they want me to be, which is who they want to be, who they expect to be, in order to feel safe, to feel wanted, to feel secure in the love of another's face, reflecting their face back to them identically. But I'm no Prince Hamlet, and I'm not a real Dominican. A fellow Dominican writer once told me. Because to be real, I'd have to be who I'm afraid I'm not. But what I don't understand, what I fail to realize, is that I was never Dominican, if by that word is meant a traditional national selfhood, beginning with the flaming sword of my macho masculinity. But there's more to be said. I began, again, with the notion that it is only tribal resemblance that affords the love that we need, expect, respect, desire, crave, suffer for eons to wait for. It's dawning on me slowly that only other people like me, who look like me and talk like me and think like me and were born like me and eat the same food as me and listen to the same music as me, will, can, could ever love me. Except I don't listen to the same music, I don't cook the same food, and my favorite dish is sushi. Like revenge, best served cold. And yes, that's another cringy joke, but it's only a fucking poem, not an autobiography. I never said I was an ex-Dominican, did I? Well, yes, I did once. Autobiography of an Ex-Dominican was a bad working title for my first poetry collection, though I'm no James Weldon Johnson, and I may or may not have sold my birthright for a mess of poetry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That last line, I'm still reverberating from it.
Octavio, thank you. That was incredible. I loved hearing that. And I want to echo all of your thank yous to everyone here. It's such an honor to be here and so much fun. And I'm really excited for this conversation. So I'm going to read some sections from my heroic sonnet crown, I'm okay, but the country is not. So this is 15 sonnets. The first 14 sonnets, the last line of the sonnet becomes the first line of the next sonnet. And then the 15th sonnet is composed of all of the first lines. And I'm going to read the first 3 sonnets, and then I'm going to read the 9th sonnet and the 11th and 12th. So it is a little weird to be excerpting from these because they do link, but I'm hoping this will show some of the linking. I'm okay, but the country is not, says my grandmother before she dies, before she closes her eyes and sleeps the sleep from which one does not rise. Breath curdles what's left of the words in her, the ocean her lungs will become. Drift down river, familiar current of language, swirling ink-stained skies. But at the end, it's calm. A blanket unfurls. She lies still, a raft in an eddy cocooned in cotton departure. On the far edge of the bed, a scarred shoreline waits. There's a map of ruin inside each veined limb, trails of bruises you can follow back. Once a girl played a finger piano in a white-collared dress, and spades of curls exploded from her skull like scales as she laughed at the music her own fingers made. Follow the music her fingers made. This is how we slip into memory. Laugh with her. This is how we fall. I remember everything, she says, face to the wall. It's a problem. Her voice is frayed, a leaking ship. The newspapers pile up unread. She doesn't flip a page, afraid the words she will not say. And yet we see her see the people forgetting, unspooling a century, how the fascia, invisible braid, coiling strip that ties our tongues to our hearts is tightening. Never forget, pink membrane shard of ash she taught me to carry under it, sugar cube, our sweet defiance. Now mouths hang open as we speak, even swallowing. What Jew goes easy. She tosses, turns, is fitful, caught, and not until the final day does she succumb to silence. On the final day, she succumbs to silence's drip, but still at her own funeral, she speaks. The rabbi calls it a first. My uncle holds his iPhone up high and we huddle in close. Listen as she recites with slurred lip, Carlisle, waterlogged lungs swimming to the sodden tip of her tongue. Here hath been dawning another blue day. Then think, wilt thou let it slip useless away? I fold my printed transliterated page of Kaddish, Grip these words I don't know, fold and fold until it is a white square at the bottom of my pocket. Promise or accusation I hold tight to my fist. Later, in the dead winter leaf litter of my mother's yard, I scroll headlines, weep, bite the riddle half cracked in my cheek. What slips and keeps on slipping? I am a hopeless clot of knuckles and grief. Unstring, unstrung. It gives me comfort, our shared loose tongue. I think before I speak, then stumble the spiral staircase, tumble down left foot, loose foot, the rights to bite, a tablespoons for eating tables with, the blue plate shattered, then the coffee cup. I tried to glue it before I threw it away. I write these poems to braid you a daisy chain, twist you a helix of fairy lights, line your path with brown-haired girls, their linked arms in fleur-de-lis and silver snaps. But just look at these hands. I'm shit with a tape measure, worse with a hammer. Mornings I lie in my bed, rectangles on all sides, and bang the walls with my fists. These sonnets are not what I thought. I'm sorry I built you a box when all I wanted was to blossom you back. I've seen this before. One by one, the results come in. First, a mild stroke. Next, kidneys wither. A fascist bloviates on the screen. A grandmother extends her left arm to the phlebotomist's glove. A dark ocean of bruise gathers tidal beneath her skin. Each morning's headlines are another fist. I wake to the wood stove's cold belly and scrape the firebox clean. Sunrise comes for me through the trees and her bright wound demands, get up, get dressed. In the bathroom, I bare my teeth to the mirror, grip the porcelain. Familiar doesn't make easier, but memory is a muscle. I let it hold me when my knees go loose. Inheritance means I will bend and lace my boots. I will pick up my shovel and teeter my blade into frosted root rot. I will tuck late daffodil bulbs between clay-packed stones, and some will die, and some will bloom. Some will die before spring, and some will bloom ragged and yellow, orange-frilled mouths hungry for a milder wind, double heads casting in different directions. I weave the garden rows tending. I wander the rocky path, and the thud of my footsteps echoes me. Once I breathed in the sharp green air and thought work will set me free. Then I recalled the iron gates that spell these words, language like chromosomes set deep in the bones. A hole is for digging. I dig you another poem, then descend into the poem to wait. Each hole leads to another hole, half mitzvah, half grave. They gather in circles, they helix the hillside. Half the time, I'm afraid of where my feet will take me. My mother furrows as she reads the news. We're going backwards. I press my nose to the earth. Wherever we end up, we'll bring our shovels. Wherever we go, there'll be music there.
Thank you. Okay, we know my internet is having terrible trouble, so I am staying off video, but I'm here feeling this. So I wanted to ask you both, we think of a eulogy. When I heard the word, I just think of a eulogy as a remembrance and appreciation for a person who has died. But clearly yours are so much bigger and encompassing so much more, and yours are elegies. So can you help us understand the difference and what you were working with?
Julia, do you want to take this or should I start?
I mean, so A eulogy is a funeral oration, right? So that's when we remember someone and celebrate their life. And an elegy is a poem of lamentation. So it's a dwelling in grief. And so, for example, in mine, in a eulogy, I would avoid talking about someone's illness and death because that's not the way I want to remember them. But in elegy, I wrote this trying to work through my grief. And so I was dwelling in things that I wouldn't necessarily dwell inside if in eulogy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful way of thinking about it, I think, Julia. I love the idea of the elegy as dwelling in grief. And just to add a little bit to this, so I'm obviously a Swati nerd, and so I looked up the definitions, and eulogy is a speech or writing in praise of a person, especially an oration in honor of the deceased, right? So as Julia said, it is the U, right? The EU kind of tells you that it's a positive approach, right? And as Julia also said, it's the things that you want to remember, the good things, right? You don't want to dwell in death when you're trying to eulogize someone. Whereas the elegy is a funeral song. So this is the definition of an elegy, a sad or mournful musical composition. And I found it interesting that, again, echoing what Julia said, that it's very specifically an elegy is a poem, and in this definition, it's a song. And I find that that's another interesting distinction, right? A eulogy would be an oration, a speech, right? Whereas an elegy is a song. And what I loved about your crown, Julia, is how towards the end of the crown you start addressing. The speaker starts addressing the grandmother. It's a wonderful moment of the you, right? And so I just thought it was a really wonderful way of distinguishing between those two modes. And in some ways, the elegy belies the eulogy, right? The eulogy is in some ways the pretty version, and the elegy is what the poets, give us, which is the fists, the guts, the bones, right?
Yeah. So, I was thinking that in both of our pieces, there are eulogies embedded within the elegy, but then there's this very active grief, the moment in your piece of the I don't want to write this, and the wiping of the glasses, these sort of raw moments even of acknowledging how the form won't hold the words that need to be said and the grief that needs to be voiced and experienced, which is the ways that it pushes on its own form, is interesting and fascinating to me. And so it's what makes it, that rawness is what makes the work so human and universal, I think.
So, and I want to add another element, because both of your pieces aren't just about the individual, your personal grief, but kind of a bigger picture, political or sort of historical. Well, you can't see my hands moving. I'm getting larger and larger. But can you talk a little bit more about how it moves out and how you thought about how to move your personal dwelling in grief into a larger vision?
So I'm going to jump in because I really liked how Julia does this in the Heroic Crown. So toward the end of the Crown, I was privileged to read it ahead of time, which is why this is such a wonderful opportunity. And I love how the election starts, and so it's a wonder, and in a way, temporally, it actually goes backwards, right? So the crown actually goes backwards in time, like reversing itself, almost as if it's trying to undo right the final moment. And so you have moments of the 2016 presidential election, right, and the grandmother. She's seen it before. And so I loved how Julia did this, right? Very, very subtle, and it felt really organic, right? And so it doesn't hit you over the head. And yet I think it's a really wonderful way of tying the significance of this life and this bond to this larger set of significances, right? And so what I'm trying to do in this poem is also speaking about the collective and the political and the historical, as well as the personal and the loss, right? And I think I struggle with how to integrate the political in ways that that I'm still working through, right? Because it is a poem, it's not a manifesto, although I think the mode that I'm working on does have a little bit of that kind of edge. And so in a way I am trying to tap into the political, but again, in a way that's organic, that doesn't feel like it's a form of posturing. In a way, I'm doing a kind of an anti-political politics in terms of the position of the speaker.
That's really interesting. I have to say that for me, political grief and anger were not, so they were inseparable, I guess, for me, for my personal grief. My grandmother, who was born in New York in 1924 as the daughter of Jewish immigrants, and then she passed away in the end of January 2017. And it felt to me like the election and her death were directly tied to each other. You know, I felt that completely. I basically felt that Trump killed my grandmother. You know, I felt that she was someone who was passionately anti-fascist, and that, you know, there was a heartbreak for her. And so I think they were woven from the outset in that poem, because grief is a very, very messy process. And all of these things were woven together to me with the sort of emotional density that I tried to make come across in the poem. But I think, you know, I wasn't always even aware of it, because it was just the way I thought about it from the beginning, honestly.
I just want to ask everybody to start putting questions in the chat. I have more, but I want to make sure that I get to all of your questions as well. Julia, you started to answer this when you said about braiding, but I'm really thinking about, you know, as a poet, I'm talking about structure now. So Tavi, yours, I've seen it on the page. It's a prose poem, at least at the moment. I know it's still in process. And Julia, yours is this crown of sonnets where that last line gets picked up as the first line of the next one, so braided together. And I want to know, like, how you decided which form to use. Did the poem go through several different forms before you found its way here?
Yes.
And how do you think those forms are serving the elegy?
Yeah, okay. So it definitely went for a lot of changes. I originally wrote this poem as sort of like a 4-page kind of rant. And I hung on to it that way for a while, and it just, you know, eventually settled in that I needed another form for it. And the sonnets came up in a couple of ways, but one of them is that they felt like a place to sort of crystallize the individual moments and experiences of grief, and also some of the anger that I was feeling, because this sort of compact look of the sonnet on the page felt like it could hold these sort of, you know, icy like droplets of anger almost, in a way. But the interlocking element of the crown is really important here, because for a couple of things. For one reason, my grandmother was a historian of science, and her work was on 19th century theories of heredity that predated modern genetics. So I was thinking about DNA. I was thinking about epigenetic memory and trauma, and these studies that have been done that show that trauma is passed through generations, so historic trauma, et cetera. And so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the ways that grief carries on in our bodies, in our, you know, it transmutes, but it carries with us. So the idea of the interlocking ability of the sonnets in the heroic crown really references for me those ideas of helix and braiding that ran through my grief, but also through my understanding of history and sort of a way to honor my grandmother as well.
That's really beautiful. I love toward the end of the crown. And again, the end it's in quotation marks because the crown is, of course, a cycle, right? That never ends, where you talk about giving her this tarnished crown. So I love the self-consciousness toward the end of the end of the cycle, the first cycle, so to speak. Yeah, and I thought it was a really wonderful kind of harmonizing of content and form. I find that poetic form lends itself to that kind of obsessive dwelling over grief, and so I really appreciate the crown as well. I have a crown, a smaller crown, not a heroic crown, an anti-heroic crown in my second collection, Limerence. And so I think I can see the usefulness of the crown itself, right, as a form of mourning, as a monument, and also a way of, kind of holding on to the past. And I think what I'm doing in my poem is in some ways the opposite. I'm unleashing the poetry from the line breaks. And so the poem did go through iterations. At first, I was doing very random. It was basically like leaves of grass. So just all the way to the page. The poem has been compared to Kaddish. Speaking of Kaddish, obviously by Ginsberg. Yeah. And so I kind of struggled with letting it not be a poem, letting it be a poem in prose. And so what I decided is, instead of line breaks, I'm going to do stanza breaks. And so that's how I decided to still make it a poem, but also release some of the conventions of poetness that I think are ways of holding the grief and ways of kind of, condensing the rage and the pain. But I almost wanted to not condense and not to contain. I wanted to just unleash it. And so it really does edge onto memoir. It edges onto prose. But if you listen, I think part of what I'm doing is this kind of queering of the memoir by making it into a poem. And so what is a poem really, right? I even say, or the speaker says, this is not an autobiography. And so what makes it a poem if you don't have line breaks, right? And so I think that's really interesting to me. And it's also interesting to me that Julia, in your sonnets, one of them, I noticed that the rhymes were totally off. And just ladies and gentlemen, and non-ladies and non-gentlemen, I hope we can say that this is an incredible performance. This heroic crown, she's using the Italian sonnet form, which is the most difficult. If you're going to do it in English, it is so difficult. It has like 2 rhymes. Each sonnet has only 2 rhymes. And so when it breaks down, I really felt that like unleashing that I'm talking about. So I thought that was a wonderful way of modulating. And so for me, the modulation happens at the stanza level. And then I also use Roman numerals to separate the sections. So it's in all these like fragmented sections. And part of it is that all the sections are a new beginning. So every Roman numeral is number 1. And so in a way, it's this obsessive, kind of cyclical in a different way that I'm working through the work of mourning.
I love that. And I think exactly what you were saying about finding a way to not, you didn't want to contain the grief and you didn't want it to be held by the form. It makes so much sense to me. It's exact what you pointed out. I want to acknowledge, which is that so I used the Petrarchan rhyme scheme, and at the beginning of the sextet, it gives way. So they're no longer rhymed after that point. So that's right at the volta is where the form no longer can contain the grief.
Amazing. That's amazing. And just to sort of slip this in. So in other words, I think what I'm hearing, Julia, is that the crown itself is a sonnet and there's a volta in the crown. So there's one sonnet that is the volta for the whole crown. The
volta for the whole crown.
That's
and that's why it's a broken crown, is because it breaks at that point.
I love that. That's really great.
Wow. Wow. Now I want to go try to write a crown just because I wanted these techniques. I just want to give them a shot.
If you're going to write a crown, I have advice from Patricia Smith, which I did not follow because I didn't hear this advice from her until after. But apparently you write the last poem first,
Okay.
and then you go backward. I didn't, and it's really hard not to, so I will just want to dispense that word of wisdom. When she said that, I was like, oh, of course. But yeah, I hadn't done it that way.
Okay. I love Tavi when he said, well, as a Swarthmore, intellectual nerd, here's what I went and did. So, because you're speaking my language. But I do want to know, how do you think your experience at Swarthmore informs you as in the subject matter, in how you go about writing, in kind of this nerdy intellectual digging into things? How do you think it informs your poetry? And did you hear any of that, or did I go
We
away?
did. Yeah, I
Oh,
think
good.
it's Julia, do you want to start? I need to think about this for a second.
I mean, it's actually quite a dense question, right? I mean, I think that the obvious answer that I would like to start with is Nat Anderson, who is just an incredible mentor to me and professor at Swarthmore, and who is certainly the first person to challenge me to write and think about form. Although I have to say the sonnet that I wrote in her class was terrible. I've always been terrified of sonnets. I mean, that's actually part of why I use sonnets here, was because they scare me. And I think I needed to be scared, write a poem that was scare me. As grief is frightening, right? And as so much that was going on in that poem is frightening. But yes, absolutely. I think for me, I can't tell you how I was transformed as a poet and continue to be by everything that Nat has taught me and all of the support she's offered me in my work since then as well.
I'll jump in. So I did not study with Nat Anderson, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I've since met her, and she is wonderful, and she's also a mentor of another dear Swati friend of mine who's also a poet who's in the audience. Hi, Neil. So I was a bit of a shrinking violet at Swarthmore. I think I didn't begin my journey as a poet at Swarthmore, but I think I became a serious poet at Swarthmore. But I did it outside of the workshop model, and so I did a lot of writing and just kind of traded poems with friends. I did, John Freeman was in my freshman year dorm. I'm sure you've heard of John Freeman, who used to edit Granta. So he was also editing Small Craft Warnings. But I think I was an apprentice poet, right? I had only been writing poetry for 2 years in high school when I got to Swarthmore, and so it was, in some ways, I didn't think I was ready to do the workshops. And so I've done a lot of workshops since. But I really felt like it was a more private kind of experience for me at that point. I don't think I was ready to do the public, the rigors of the workshop model. And to be honest, I also felt a little alienated, and I'm saying this as an associate professor of English. I felt a little alienated by the English department. To be fair, part of it was me, because I'm this brown kid from Brooklyn. English is my second language, and I hear that you have to apply, you have to submit a manuscript to get into the workshops. I'm like, I'm not doing that. So that kind of like lack, I mean, that's a racialized low self-esteem, right? Which I write about. And so I think that also was a barrier, right? Structurally, right? And of course, we all know Swarthmore can be very intimidating in many different ways. So that was one way that I was intimidated by that model. I don't know if they do that anymore, but I hope they don't. In any case, I think I did a lot of it on my own and with friends. A lot of us were, kind of counterculture poets and artists, and we did like student films and all this neat artistic stuff. But that was not, it was outside the institution, right? And I guess we cultivated that anti-institutional vibe at Swarthmore, which is the only way we could be there as, you know, youngins.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing all of that. And by the way, I applied to that workshop and didn't get in. So just that's my history on it. So I have a question from Neil DeMaio. I hope I said that right. Both poets play with form, so we're going back to the form conversation. Tavi talked about playing with stanza breaks in some prose-leaning poems, and Julia modified the lines that link sonnet to sonnet, like laugh becoming follow, and located a volta within the broken crown. So the question is, which do you like best, when form lines itself up or when innovation presents itself?
It's a trick question.
Yeah, it is a trick question.
Thanks, Neil. Do you want to start?
This one's hard. Can I just say both? I mean, I think those two things can happen at the same time. And I think that innovation can present itself in the form lining up. I mean, so for example, the honest answer to the volta in my crown and where it breaks down is that I couldn't hang with the rhyme scheme anymore, right? Like I just, as a poet, I got stuck. I stopped there and I let it hang with 8 sonnets for months and months and months and months. And then I was reading Terence his sonnets, American Sonnets to My Past and Future Assassin. And I was like, okay, well, I just can let go of the rhyme scheme here. And there was a sonnet in particular, you know, there are a bunch of them. And so I'm trying to remember which one it was in particular, where he's really talking about the limitations of the sonnet. I think he says something like half neat grinder, half casket or something like that. I can't remember. Half music box, half meat grinder. And it was this, you know, I think those were the moments where I could start to acknowledge the problems with the sonnet form and how it was, you know, harming me as well in certain ways and in the poem. And so I want to say that it was organic, that it broke there, and that it was a poet choice and I knew all the craft. But the truth is I just got frustrated, right? And both things can be true, which is what's fun about poetry. So I want to say that innovation and, you know, and things lining up can be the same thing sometimes.
I love that answer, Julia. And I think you're right. I agree with the idea that even if, I mean, I think maybe especially with a received form, you must innovate, because otherwise you're just painting by numbers and the reader is going to feel it, right? So one thing that I'll say is that the sonnet that Julia is talking about, the sonnet that breaks the mold, is a really good poem. And so I think it's smart, and a good poet breaks the form instead of breaking the poem to keep the form, right? And that's what makes it really organic, right? And so I think the form can be useful. The crown that comes to mind, Julie, I don't know if you're familiar with A Wreath for Emmett Till. It's incredible, right? Another heroic crown, right? It's a beautiful book too, with illustrations. And I think in that collection, I'm blanking on the poet's name because I'm really bad with names. She talks about how the form was almost like a vessel that allowed her to hold the pain of, you know, writing this political grief for this young boy. And it's in a way, form can be helpful for the work of mourning, the work of grief. But I think there is a point where the form becomes dead, and then you're unable to reach the actual pain. So I think it's interesting to not romanticize the form too much. It can be useful, but I think you have to let the spirit take over if the form feels like it's, you know, just a zombie, right? And there's no point in writing zombie sonnets, right? No one's asking for these things, right? Yes, thank you, Marilyn Nelson. It's an incredible tour de force. And again, so I do think there is room and there's a place for truly formal work, right? As we saw from Julia's work. And yet I think there's also the inspiration has to go beyond the formula, because it's not simply about mastery. And what is grief and mourning if not the loss of mastery, right? So it would be weird if your crown did not break down, Julia, right? Because then it wouldn't be authentic to the experience that you're depicting, so that you're chronicling, right?
Mm, mm. Oh, thank you. That was really interesting. As you were talking, you were starting to, so we have a few more, we have like one more question, and then I'm going to have you to read a little bit to close us out. And you were both starting to talk about people who inspired you or gave you permission. I loved what Julia said about Terence Hayes' book giving her permission to approach the sonnet in a different way. And earlier, Tavi, you said that you're going with queering the memoir. And I'm sort of curious, did anybody help inspire you or give you permission to do that? And who's talking to you? Whose work is talking to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting, exciting time to be working in this bizarre queer space of memoir and autobiography and poetry. So I did the Lambda retreat this past summer. I had an amazing workshop where I workshopped this poem, and it was still very raw. And they really helped me think through the questions of form, because even a prose poem has form, and I think that's one thing that I liked from their feedback. And so I've been in touch with a lot of these guys. They're all like incredibly talented queer and trans poets. I'm really bad with names, so I'm not going to mention their names. But I've also been working on more formal poems, like a crown that's a little bit, it's a different kind of mode of mourning, so to speak. But like I mentioned, Marilyn Nelson, I think there's a moment for the sonnet right now that I think is very exciting. So Terence Hayes has been obviously a huge influence. E.B. Shockley as well is an incredible formal poet. So yeah, so those are some of the exciting work. And I'm also, to be honest, like as a scholar, I'm also interested in in writers who are bending the rules of critique, like Julia Kristeva. She has that essay Stabat Mater that's in 2 columns, and so I got a lot of interesting kind of feedback about how to think about this poem beyond even the poetry category, and yet that it still holds on to it being a poem, and that there's a weird kind of queer magic in that, right? And I'm not quite sure what that means. The last thing I'll say is that I was very frustrated with the poetic form when I turned to this memoir. I think because it does have that element of mastery that I think is antithetical to some of the emotions I wanted to mine. Right? That kind of like virtuosity, right? And I think I have that obviously in this poem, but it's not about this kind of pointillist perfection that a lot of poetry tends to be, because it's so finessed and so specific, right? And so I wanted something a little freer, a little baggier, right? A little angrier, right? So yeah. That was a lot.
Great. Okay, I want you both to read a little bit more. Can both of you read for a minute or two to close this out? Tavi, how about you start?
Sure. I'm going to read a poem called Rosie Guildenstern. Just a little bit of background. This poem I wrote a long time ago, and it's about a therapist that I had who helped me with a lot of the issues that are in that poem I read earlier. And her name is not Guildenstern. You can probably guess what her actual name is, but of course there's the veil of confidentiality that must be protected. She loved this. It was published in this collection of writings about psychoanalysis by therapists as well as analysans. And so Rosie Guildenstern. She stood 5'4", red-brown hair, glasses, oblong shape, her nails blunt, simple. Her nose would wrinkle as she urged me to keep talking through snotty tissue.
Hmm.
Once I had to wait in the narrow lobby where a brown-haired woman, faceless, standing, blotted soundless tears. The amazing vitality. How ever did you sponge so much from so many of us, pulling our heads from the sands of our own stories? There you sat, hands on lap, in a dark suit, pearls, never yawning.
Thank you. Thank you. Julia?
Yeah, but I just have to say, pulling us from the sands of our own stories is just, that line. Oh my gosh. Okay. Sorry, I have papers everywhere. Hang on. I'm just gonna read the final poem in The Crown. So this is the one that's a version of the first lines of all of them. I'm okay, but the country is not, says my grandmother, before we follow the music her fingers made. This is how we slip into memory, how we fall. The final day she succumbs to silence, leaves me a hopeless clot of knuckles and grief. A friend slips my iron shoes off. Now they're bolted to riverbank cement. Where have we left our dead? Moraine is a resume inside my bones, proof I'll never slip. Smooth as the space we're born to, we torque the Mobius strip. Our heels sing against the kitchen slate, blue plates, silverware, unstring, unstrung. It gives me comfort, our shared loose tongue. All I wanted was to blossom you back, but the results come in one by one, and I've seen this before. Some will die before spring, some will bloom ragged and yellow. Bring your shovel. Wherever we go, there'll be music there. If a damaged crown is all I can give you, then here it is.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And someone, let me just go find it earlier. Nancy Bekovac said, the crown is like the memorial wreaths that used to be hung on the door when someone died. Those black or very dark wreaths lasted into the later 20th century, often with trailing black ribbons. So you've sort of, it's given us that in poetic form.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good image to put with it. Thank you both so much. And thank you everybody for coming. I love that we're celebrating poetry and sharing it. And I learned a ton. I put in the chat links to all of their books and ways to, I don't think I have ways to contact them. So I will add that to the chat right now if you want to email them. And remember that the recording is going to be up on the, here we go. Up on the SwatTalks, the alumni page in 2 to 3 weeks. Okay. Right here, I'm going to say bye. I'm really here. All right. Thanks,
Great
everybody.
to see
Thank
you.
so
Thank
much.
you so
Thank you
much.
so much. This is wonderful. Thank you guys.
Oh, that was great.
Wonderful. Thank you.